what I kind of soon realized as well is to really get a job in Bangkok, you had to be in Bangkok. And I think this is something we still see today, quite frankly. Companies appreciate people who are willing to move, but there's a whole big difference between being on the ground and then actually having done it.
Hi there, and welcome to Made It in Thailand, the podcast where we learn how to thrive in Thailand from top performers who have found success in the kingdom. I'm your host, Scott Pressimone. Today, I'm speaking with Pierre-Emmanuel Mol. Pierre is going to share his insights from his decade-long experience living and working in Thailand. He'll explain how he found work in Bangkok and how he and his wife are preparing for parenthood. Without further ado, let's jump into the interview. Thank you so much, Pierre, for joining me today. I thought of you because given that you've been here for around the same amount of time I have, I think, has it been, 10 years or so for you that you've been living and working in Thailand?
Yeah, just about 10 year in October this year. So it's been quite a trip.
Nice. Well, for those who don't know you, can you give kind of a rundown about who you are, what you do, what you were doing before coming to Thailand, and just kind of give your the TLDR of your story?
Yeah, I'll see if I can be short because it feels like, it's been a very long trip and lots of adventures. But to sort of start, just before my move to Southeast Asia, I was working in the DC area, working for a marketing strategy consulting firm. And my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, was also working in the DC area, kind of doing the DC lifestyle. We were having a great setup, reverse commuting to Bethesda. Everything was great professionally, and anyway, eventually she got the opportunity to work in a few projects that were based in Vietnam. And so she went there for the first time in April 2012, and she came back and she was like, "This is awesome. What do you think about moving there?" And I was like, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that at all, but that sounds pretty awesome. I've never been to Vietnam, but I've lived in Singapore before when I was a kid, and this is a part of the world I'd like to go back to." And it felt like, I was ready after being for 5 or so years in the DC area, that I was ready to kind of move on and explore things a bit more professionally and just be in another region of the world. So in a nutshell, she kind of said that. And then for a very long time, it felt like it was never going to happen. And then just when we thought it was not going to happen, last minute, we kind of got the green light to kind of go and move to Vietnam for her job. And so we just decided to move there. I didn't have a job. It was like, oh, well, I guess I'll just figure it out when I get there. And so, there's a lot of uncertainty about moving to Vietnam first and then figuring things out. But I talked to my company. They took it very well. They understood the opportunity that I had been a good employee. And so there were no hard feelings about me leaving at that time. We kind of worked out a sort of remote work arrangement, which lasted for about 6 months. Obviously, they wanted to hire someone full time in the U.S. So unfortunately, it couldn't continue. For me, it was like a perfect gig, quite frankly, working remote like that. Yeah, and so just moved there, and then from there you start meeting a lot of people, making new connections, and there's always a chance to make things happen. But so from Vietnam, and actually, not everything worked out right away either. I couldn't quite find the right type of job that I was looking for. And we were based in Hanoi, which I think is in a way similar to Washington, D.C. It's very much where the government is. So lots of government related jobs, a lot of law firms and whatnot. And I was more already in the B2B tech space. And it was a less international country, especially, think about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was mostly motorcycles in the streets. And now when you go back to Hanoi, you can see a lot of cars. A lot of things have changed. They're now even leading in electric cars, funnily enough. I was seeing that, one of their Vietnamese companies is trying to get started on I think in the New York Stock Exchange, the VinFast company. I don't know if you've heard of it. But it's a really happening country, very dynamic. But just like in the U.S. with DC and New York, the business heart of the country is really in the South in Ho Chi Minh. But what we ended up deciding is because we also had a connection with Bangkok, we decided that we would rather move to Bangkok and start looking for a job from there.
It sounds like what you first tried, and I love the fact that you brought up that you were already working with a company that you liked. So just
Yeah,
going to them and saying, "Hey, how about I work remote?" I mean, that's an amazing opportunity because a lot of people don't know that when you come to like a place like Thailand or Vietnam, and if you're working for like a local company, then you're working in their local currency, and unfortunately, sometimes kind of a more based around local salary. So if you
yeah.
can carry over your U.S. salary or your salary from your home country, that's kind of amazing. It sounds like that worked pretty well. Were there any challenges on your end for that? I mean, because Vietnam is kind of on the other side of the world. So was that challenging for you? Were you staying up late for those 6 months or so that you were working that way?
Um, the way it worked is I didn't actually have to stay up too late, and so we kind of just did everything remote. You know what? It's been such a long time, but I really don't even really remember getting on phone calls. I think that was pretty unique at the time. I was working on doing sort of business analysis on a new sort of solution that the company had come up with, sort of analyzing like your social media IQ. Um, and
Mm.
I was one of the few people that had been trained on how to build that report and analysis. And that was something I could do remote. So uh, over time, like I mentioned, we kind of they wanted to find someone in house, and just the time it took them to train someone in house, um, is sort of the amount that it took, 6 months, and yeah. So I think it can be actually very easy to work remote. You will need to get on the occasional late night call, uh, but it's not always mandatory. Uh, and again, I think that will really depend on the company culture and whether the company already has this sort of global footprint or not.
But it's important to also look at the fact that that was 10 years ago, right? And
Yeah,
a
yeah,
lot has changed since then in terms of people's openness to working remote. But I mean, I still think it's really important to do what you did just because sometimes people might say, you know what, I'm going to take a sabbatical or I'm going to leave or whatever. And they might kind of cut off ties with their employer at that moment. But even just
yeah,
running that past as an option, the fact that you thought to do that is huge because that must have given you a big leg up, or at least given you like a lot of comfort that you knew for at least a few months you were going
yeah.
to continue to work on that project. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think keeping a salary, even if it was already, half the salary that I used to get, since I wasn't working full time at that point, was highly beneficial.
Mm.
And then as well, I think the company really appreciates it that, you're not just uh, leaving overnight, that you're helping them transition. So it ends up being a win-win for everyone.
That's awesome. So to go back to your story then, so it sounds like you were in Vietnam, you were in Hanoi, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
And you and your girlfriend at the time, now your wife, decided
correct.
to move to Bangkok, and that was now you were still looking for a job, as far as I understand at that point. But then your girlfriend, was she able to then transfer, or how did that work at the time?
Yeah, we were a bit in this, unique situation where she was able to just also move to Bangkok and start working remotely herself. And so she had another project, I think, that was based in Bangkok. That was also one of the reasons. But she had other projects in other places. So she was able to sort of make it work in general. And, she works in international development. So generally, she was already working for a company that's used to having global projects, people working out of different offices. So that helped out a lot. Um, yeah. And when we
How,
moved to
how was the
Bangkok,
transition for you though?
yeah, I mean, for me, I had been to Bangkok. The other thing is, my wife's family is based out of Bangkok, so we also had somewhere to kind of land and crash when we arrived. So that was super helpful. Yeah, and I'd been to Bangkok before. Now I didn't really know Bangkok that well, let's be honest. So there's still a lot to do and figure out. Building a network, really kind of again, building a network from zero since Even though my wife had a connection to Bangkok, she was not from Bangkok. She's not Thai either. So still a lot to figure out. And once we moved here.
How would you compare the job market then? So when you were landed, it's fantastic that you had like a place to
Mhm.
stay. You weren't really crashing in hotels and stuff like this, right? So you got
Yeah.
here. Did you start looking for a job right away? How was that? What were the differences between Bangkok and Vietnam? Or was it a very different type
Yeah.
of market? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I had actually started looking for jobs in Bangkok before I moved here. But what I kind of soon realized as well is to really get a job in Bangkok, you had to be in Bangkok. And I think this is something we still see today, quite frankly. Companies, appreciate people who are willing to move, but there's a whole big difference between being on the ground and then actually having done it. And also, there's always the concern that someone may move over and then realize, hey, Bangkok is not for me. It's not a city for everyone. I've met a lot of expats that love Bangkok and want to stay here, see themselves in the future in Bangkok. But I've also met a lot of them who are like, yeah, this was fun and this is great, but this was good for like 2 or 3 years, or now we want to start a family and we prefer going back to Europe or being closer to um, our family for whatever reason. Whereas other people, like myself and my wife were like, no, we want to stay here. There's a ton of benefits in being here. You can get a great lifestyle that you can get somewhere else.
So you got down on the ground, you got settled. You were looking for jobs. I love that you pointed out the fact that a lot of people want to work in Thailand or in Asia, and they'll oftentimes be sending their resume from their home country. And it's not to say that they don't have the skills needed, but it is a big risk. I mean, there are so many people that come and go, and it's
Yeah,
it's really. I mean, the problem is even if someone like yourself, who was already acclimated to Southeast Asia and Vietnam and other things, and you were comfortable, it sounds like, kind of being on the ground, so many people it doesn't last for, and it's a huge risk for these companies. And that's why it's so important to have maybe 2 years or so of like you've been in the country, and then you're a lot more attractive to these employers.
yeah.
So that first job is sometimes the toughest one to get. So can you walk us through that? How did you end up landing a job that was aligned with your skill set?
Yeah. So when I moved to Bangkok and I ended up finding a first job, and let's be honest, that job did not work out. I found it through just submitting resumes and whatnot, and had a good chat with the owner. It was sort of tied to um, somewhat tied to the type of work I was doing back in DC, where we had started doing some market research on IT service providers working with big tech vendors. And essentially, the, the, the company I was hired by, they were trying to set up their own MSP business, sort of going from sort of a more traditional break and fix and kind of going more into managed services. And um, so kind of started there. And it was just culturally a very different way of working. And without going into all the details, like it was not really my first choice. But you have to start somewhere, and sometimes you also need a job to get a job. Ironically, too. So kind of decided, hey, let's just give it a go. Let's see how it goes. And but I was also lucky that actually through a connection of my wife, actually, I was introduced to another company, Pronto Marketing, where we both met and started working, over 10 years ago. And so it was actually through a colleague of my wife who just happened to know Tim, who was working at Pronto. And that's how I got connected to Pronto. And I kind of submitted my resume, had an informal interview. At the time, they were like, hey, it's great to meet you, but, we don't have a position open right away. I was like, that's okay. Let's just stay in touch. I kind of followed what the company was doing. They had a few events that I attended. And so that was a way to, kind of get to know people, connect. And then eventually I was lucky enough that a position opened and the timing was right. And so I didn't stay in that first job too long, luckily. And kind of soon after that, I was able to transition to Pronto and kind of, get a new job that really kind of was in line with sort of the type of work I was looking for in terms of B2B tech marketing, having the opportunity to kind of lead my own projects and kind of continue learning and expanding on a lot of what I've been working on in the States.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think it's another good lesson there of when you're networking or when you're talking to people, you're not always looking for your next employer directly. You're not always looking for the here and now, like I need a job right now. Sometimes it is just like meet the company, meet a person who then knows another person, right? And because again, I sometimes see people starting with an ask, right? Where they're like, can I have a job or whatever? And it's like, sometimes it's like, just get to know them. Just like
Yeah.
sometimes their friends' friends, sometimes that owner knows another owner who's starting something that needs your skill set, right? And just knowing that that does take time. And it goes back to the whole, it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? So it sounds
Yeah.
like you played it patiently. You started with some level of a connection, but then at the same time you were patient about it, and then you waited for the right time, and then you landed something that it sounds like you enjoyed.
Yeah. And I think it's also a good testament for the power of attending events. I know we're coming out of 2 years of lockdown and whatnot. And our companies are all gone working remote full time. And don't hear me wrong, I love working remote. And I still think that most of the time, 80% of the time working remote is the most productive way for me at the very least. And when I go into the office, I love the time in the office, but I also feel like, geez, this is not like I didn't get any deep work done. Um, and, our company is all about online marketing and helping people grow their business online. Yet, even if you're a small business in the US or if you're a company here in Thailand, you have to go to events, you have to build a network. And that's just become very apparent more and more to me recently. And, when I think of some of the things maybe I didn't continue doing enough of is perhaps that. I think life in Thailand can also get comfortable very quickly. So depending on, what kind of work you want to do and how you want to keep pushing yourself, I think kind of pushing yourself to attending more of those events and kind of continue to build that network. I think that's true anywhere. But I think it's also very true in Thailand. It's a very kind of close knit community here. I think it's a lot of the business world is located in Bangkok. Some of it is in Chiang Mai as well, but really most of it happens in Bangkok. So if you start kind of meeting a few people, you can really get to know a lot of people very fast.
Yeah, I love that you brought up how despite it being uh, a large area, I mean, when you compare Bangkok to some other places, like there are a ton of businesses here, but you
Hmm.
said close knit, and I've just seen that time and time again where you'll mention something, someone, and they will in fact know that person. They'll know that business, and that's where it's so important to not burn your bridges here because it's kind of like the 2 or 3 lines away, the people know each
Hmm.
other. Like it's
Yeah.
so. Um, so that's for better or for worse. I mean, be careful not to burn bridges, basically, and attend events like you said. What about cultural differences? So again, it sounds like you have a background of living in the U.S., just traveling. It sounds like you were pretty comfortable even in Vietnam. But was there any sort of culture shock that you experienced, either coming to Southeast Asia or to Thailand specifically, or any challenges that you still face as cultural differences being here?
Yeah. It's funny. I think my wife was more concerned about me moving here and just, maybe being a bit emotional and aggressive. I think as a French person, you tend to be a bit more outspoken. You kind of don't really hide your emotions. You tend to be comfortable with showing them. And that's definitely the opposite of what things are like in Thailand. Um, but, I think I've, at times I've definitely struggled with that at work where I like to just be a lot more direct and not beat around the bush too much. I think that can be true in the US as well, quite frankly, or I think people are a bit more measured. I think sometimes those are things I've struggled with a bit. But I would say as well, I think, plenty of other things to sort of embrace. Like one of the things that's very culturally different is that when you're driving in Thailand, it may take you some time to realize that, but no one honks. It really, you'll hear the occasional honk if really something bad is happening, or maybe if there's an angry foreigner driving behind you. But one of the things that, I really embrace and I really truly appreciate is there's just no honking. And you'll get at this crazy intersections with cars coming from all directions. And you go through it, you're kind of like, oh, this is going to be tough and whatnot. But you kind of go through it and you're like, wow, this is amazing. No one honked. And people just kind of took their time and realized that there was sort of a more positive way of going through it. And I think, again, don't hear me wrong, I definitely had some road rage in the past, and driving in the DC area, there are a lot of frustrating times. I'm sure you can relate to that. But yeah, and this was also funny because I was in Vietnam just before that. And in Vietnam, essentially honking is just another language, especially when you're driving a motorcycle. So, but just the same way I really enjoy and appreciate the fact that there's no honking. And in Thailand, I actually appreciate a lot the honking, granted, once you get used to it, in Vietnam, and you just realize it's kind of, hey, I'm here. Like, it's not meant to be an aggressive, in your face, like long honk at you. It's more like, it's just a signal. And I think that's the kind of thing as well culturally that some people will really struggle with like, why is the traffic crazy? And so if you focus too much on why is this place crazy, I think you're going to miss out or struggle enjoying the place. Cause I think there's, you're not going to love everything. There's some things you're going to have to let go. And some things you just need to embrace and hopefully enjoy.
Yeah, I love that example. Just the fact that it's different in the US and it's different in Vietnam and it's different in Thailand, just in terms, it's the same thing. It's the honking a horn. In the US, it's like if you honk the horn, who knows? Someone might be getting out of their car and ready to punch you, right? I mean, it's like that is the road rage sort of situation. In
Yeah.
Vietnam, it's like, hey, I'm here, just letting you know, right? Because there's a
Yeah.
little bit of a right of way sort of thing where rather than the whole person who's in front has the right of way, it's the person who kind of goes first has the right. It's a little bit different. So I guess there's a lot of almost sonar going on. It's like, hey, I'm here. Hey, I'm here. Everyone kind of gets the idea. Whereas in Thailand, it's mostly silence. But yeah, it's a very interesting cultural difference for sure. Now, do you get around primarily through driving like your own car? Do you use things like the BTS? I know that you sometimes use the motorcycle taxis. I see you sometimes on the back of those. So what's your rundown of your preferred way to get around?
Yeah. Well, I didn't have a car until, we started expecting a baby. So that's definitely been the driver for that. And now that we have one, it's kind of like, oh, it's going to be really hard to go back to not having a car. But I would still say, you really have to, when you're in a big city like Bangkok, and once you kind of get a sense of where you're going and how crazy traffic is going to be, you start figuring out, okay, at this time I'm going this direction, there's going to be this amount of traffic. If I don't take a motorcycle grab, I'm not going to make it on time, or it's just going to take me way more time than I want to spend in traffic. So I've taken tons and tons of motorcycle taxis. And one thing we didn't have when we first moved here, you and I, it was Grab and all those apps that now allow you to kind of, just kind of get a motorcycle just whenever you need it. And that avoids a lot of issues trying to explain where you're going. Maybe you miss out a little bit on the fun of trying to explain yourself in Thai or in English. So maybe there's a little bit of fun lost there, but that, those motorcycle taxis are super useful. And again, like if you can take the BTS, yes, for sure, take the BTS. It's safer. It's air conditioned. Foreigners love that. So yeah, I mean, for me, until today, it's always been a mix of either taking motorcycle taxis. I had my own scooter at some point and just kind of drove that around. And then, taking taxis as well, all of that. So lots of options.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just talking with someone else about motorcycles in Thailand, and I didn't recall that you had a scooter. That's good to know. And But one of the things that's interesting about it is, yes, there's a lot of accidents. There are a lot of things like this. However, I would say that people go a lot slower, especially in a lot of areas in town, where if you're taking a motorcycle taxi, you're not exactly speeding down the road. A lot of times it's like you're just going, down the way, down a Sawyer road, making a turn and
Yeah.
then getting on a BTS, or something like that. So it's not to say that it can't be dangerous. It's not to say that you're having full protective gear on and stuff all the time, but cars are not going crazy, crazy fast in a lot
Yeah.
of those areas. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. No, exactly. I think if you're taking a motorcycle taxi to do a short distance trip, then it's most likely going to be very fine and safe and whatnot. That said, yeah, one of the new dads that I play football with, he was sort of, yeah, don't take a scooter. And he drives a scooter to, go from one part of town to where we play football. And so it's actually quite a bit of distance. And for sure, that's when you start getting into the dangerous situations. Now, it's kind of the same as well, like what you were talking about in terms of the traffic actually being quite slow downtown. I think the same is true with cars, right? At first, it's very intimidating if you've never driven in this kind of crazy rush hour traffic with tons of people coming from tons of direction. Plus, you're driving on the left side of the street, and that's new, and you're still trying to orient yourself through the city. It's very intimidating, but I do think you're driving slow, and so actually, you know, you have the time to kind of see what's going on. You learn to avoid the motorcycles and the cars. So it's, I think a lot of it goes to try to think about what kind of trip you're doing and what's going to be the best choice for that kind of trip. If it's a long trip and you're going to be going over a highway, I wouldn't recommend um, getting a motorcycle taxi for that. Keeping motorcycle taxi trips short is for sure the best.
Yeah. Now, you also just shared something that's, I think, really interesting as well, is having a child on the way. So that's a huge congrats. And when again is your wife expecting?
Yeah, and just a month, so end of September. So
End of September.
yeah,
Fantastic. So
happening very
so I
soon.
think something that might be surprising to people is just, having a kid, as you both are not from Thailand. Your wife is not Thai, you're not Thai, right? And you're here, you've been here for years, and now you decided to have a child here. I'm assuming that she's going to be giving birth here in Bangkok, right? So I'd love
Yep.
to hear about that. I mean, do you feel confident in the hospitals here? How is, I'm sure, a month away, you're probably doing a lot of baby gear stuff and going to all that stuff. So how has that experience been for you? Any surprises with that process so far?
Um, yeah, I mean, so far we've been very lucky that, the pregnancy has been going well. And there's a lot of very modern hospitals here that, um, where you get really good care. So, I think at times, maybe you'll get more, better care than if you were back in the States or in Europe. And, you don't have to wait very long to get appointments or to see the doctor. And that's always a big plus. We're lucky enough to get doctors who can communicate in English as well, which obviously is a very big thing. My wife speaks better Thai than I do, but we neither of us are, near fluent enough to have conversations in Thai with a doctor. So that's been great. One of the other things that I think people may um, appreciate is that there's also a very big expat community, and among this expat community, there are a lot of doulas and midwives who are here to help you as well through the pregnancy before your child arrive. And the added benefit of that is that they will help you kind of choose, to a certain extent, the right hospital if you don't know and if you have questions. Um, you can kind of work one-on-one with someone to help you with that, kind of help you prepare generally. And, as you likely know, there's a lot of Facebook groups where people can ask a ton of questions uh, about, what to expect when you're expecting, essentially. So, I think you were on a few Facebook groups, right? When you were expecting
Yeah, yeah,
and probably still today.
yeah, you're right. There are a lot of meetup groups and stuff here, and then Facebook tends to be a good place for groups like Bangkok Dads and Dads in Thailand sort of things. And then I'm sure there's plenty of them to support wives or women that are going through this process with support groups and stuff like that for them as well. So yeah, there's a lot of great communities for that. The point that you noted about the hospitals being quite good here, I think there's a pretty drastic difference between private and public here. And so I'm assuming that whole short wait line wasn't coming from a public hospital, but the private hospitals can be quite affordable. And to your point, I've noticed that they are like even the average private hospital here, I feel is better care than I would receive in the US. That's just from my experience. I've been really impressed by a lot of the hospitals here, and it sounds like you've had a good experience with that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And the one thing I'd say is one of the things you do learn going through this process is you do learn that there are differences in medical practices, and that here, for whatever reason, C-sections are a very big part of the medical culture. And so that's definitely something you have to know before you deliver. I think you'll learn that fairly quickly one way or the other. And again, this is perhaps a good reason as well to work with someone who has knowledge of kind of the hospitals and figure that out, or just speaking with as many friends as possible to kind of hear their stories on how their delivery went in Thailand. So, I mean, I think I've also met people who had a planned C-section, and my buddy was like, you know what, this was like the best. It was planned. We went there, we were out, everything went great. Their child is doing great. So, it's not all bad. And, sometimes you do really need it. But, depending on what you really feel strong about, yeah, you'll need to be ready to advocate. And there can also be a culture that's fairly, top down in terms of doctor to patient relationship. I don't know if that's really too different from anywhere, quite frankly. I think doctors are going to be highly educated, but it's true that in Thailand, there is a bit of an expectation to, oh, you should respect the more, the older, highly educated person. So, taking that into account, and again, just something you have to work and navigate through.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And like you said, it's not better or worse. It's just something to be aware of. Is that you mentioned C-sections being very common here, and who knows? Maybe it's like if almost everyone is getting a C-section, yeah, you have to advocate and say, we might not want to do that. But it's not even just related to birth; it's related to other surgeries. I think that
Yeah.
typically there's more tendency to be pro surgery or pro intervention sooner in the process here. Another thing I know with children, again, I'm not saying better or worse, but in the U.S., if your child is sick or if you're sick, it would have to be pretty bad before you say, I'm going to check myself into a hospital. Whereas here, I know my kids go to school, and, about every other day, one of the kids didn't come to school because their parents checked them into the hospital for the cold. So
Yeah.
so there's a big tendency to do that, and I guess it's good to play it safe, but just be aware of that. They're going to kind of push you towards a surgery most frequently.
Yeah.
So.
And I think if it gets to getting a serious surgery, one of the positive things is that going to the doctor is a bit easier and cheaper, like we mentioned. So getting a second opinion is also a bit easier to do, and sometimes that may be a good way to go about it. So I know people have done that, and I think that could be one way too as well. Make sure you're making the right decision.
Yeah. Now, you had talked about how you go to networking events and how you're active. You had also mentioned that you have a friend who's a father in one of your groups or one of your sports clubs, right? So I'd love to hear more about that, because something about you, Pierre, is you're quite a modest guy. And I remember seeing you play football, or in America soccer, at the first time, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this isn't something you do just casually. You've got some skills. So, is that, how have you found that transition? Were you able to get right into sports right when you got here? Did it take you a while? Do you have any clubs or anything like that you recommend for anyone who's really good at football like yourself?
Yeah, I think that the great thing is that whether you're in Vietnam or in Thailand or pretty much anywhere in the world, I think, you're going to be able to find a football team or a soccer team And that's always been pretty easy. I think, either you go on Facebook and you kind of ask around. Um, I think my first soccer group that I found in Thailand was through a colleague who was also playing. And then kind of from there, you kind of start meeting one person who plays. And then usually people that are really into it will even play into a few different groups. And so once you start meeting one person, you can meet another person. And then eventually you can kind of get connected to a team. Our team even has a Facebook and Instagram page, and we use that at times to try to recruit new people. We're definitely not professionals, but we play in the Bangkok Casuals League, so it's still a casual league, but we do try to keep it competitive, and balance both the social element of trying to be a team, have some drinks and beers after the game, but also compete and have fun. Yeah.
Nice. So is that the main sport that you play then? You play a lot of soccer, or is there anything else that you do for fitness and exercise and stuff here?
Yeah, these days soccer is really my main sport. I mean, I played a lot of tennis growing up, and a lot of people are getting into tennis as well as they're getting older, and pickleball is starting to be a big thing. Some of my friends who are anti pickleball because they're tennis players like me, and I kind of fall in that category. I know I will end up playing pickleball at some point. I'm just delaying it. I know that's becoming a big trend here in Thailand, and so if you want to go rock climbing, I have friends that go rock climbing, which I think would be a ton of fun. It's just sometimes you've got to choose what you can do or not do. But yeah, lots of options here.
For sure. And then what about with leisure? I know you're quite hard at work most of the time, but then do you ever get out of the city? And I know it's harder to do now, obviously, with the child on the way. But prior to that, did you go out of the city a lot? Were there any sort of islands or any places that you really like and recommend?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with not an island, so to be not too cliche. Um, one of the places I really like was going all the way north to Pai, Pai, and just a bit northwest of Chiang Mai. And we went there actually kind of when COVID was starting up, so we got really lucky that it was not too busy. It was also at around New Year's time, and while Thailand is always a very warm country, lots of beaches and all that. The north of the country can actually get cooler to the point where you start wearing sweaters. I think it can snow potentially at night, maybe somewhere, maybe even a bit more north in Chiang Rai. So I don't expect to see snow in Pai, but it can go down to 15 degrees Celsius. So 40, 50 Fahrenheit, something like that. And so if you're trying to have a sort of more Christmassy environment, that's a fun thing to do. It'll still be 30 degrees during the day. Don't hear me wrong. But we were there around New Year's time, like I said, and just driving a scooter around. Just the countryside was amazing, and yeah, just a really good way to get away from the hustle and bustle of Bangkok. Bumped into a restaurant where this American guy was doing a homestay with his Thai wife, and they had a garden as well, a little bit outside of the city, and there's just living the life there. Yeah, and so just a really cool little town, but I think it's been on the circuit for a very long time, especially for people who backpack all the way to Burma.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the north can be really beautiful, and farm stays are amazing. I mean, there's there are quite a few nice farm stays all throughout the country, and you get a nice compromise where you get to like be next to the rice paddy fields and all that, but then you still get to go back to your air conditioning, assuming it's not the cooler weather that you referenced. So, no, that's really cool. Now, what about things that you might miss? Because you had mentioned, that you used to play tennis and things like that. There are probably some sports that are a little bit less common in Thailand. So, for instance, American football. I mean, I would love if people were playing intramural American football here. I haven't found that yet. But is there anything else, whether it be sports, foods, anything like that? Foods that you can get from France that you certainly can't get here. Anything like that you miss?
I mean, one thing I haven't done a really good job at, and that we used to do a lot more of in the U.S., is just going to the theater or going to more cultural events. We were also very lucky because we were living in downtown DC, and there was like theaters down the street. So going to like the theater was very easy, and there were some really good ones. Going to Woolly Mammoth and just like fun fun types of plays as well that are more modern, not just like old school theater. So I think that's been a little bit harder, I guess, to find. There are comedy clubs. There is actually one of the pubs that's pretty nearby my place where they do have a comedy club that isn't necessarily as active as a comedy club would be in the U.S. And obviously it's a bit more dependent on the local expat scene. But there are sort of bigger names as well that come to Bangkok now and then. Um, so I think that's one of the things that I've missed, and I guess as well, like if you like going to sort of smaller, more independent concerts and see more smaller bands or different types of music, maybe there's a little bit less of an opportunity to do that, or you just have to be just looking for a bit more than you would. I do know that people that are really into music still find a way to kind of do all those things. But then it's more like, oh, well, this is really far away from my house. And then you kind of start getting a bit lazy and you're like, oh, I've got all this work to do. And like, now I've got to go across town. So just the geography of things, as you may know, I mean, living in North Bangkok is sometimes perhaps a bit challenging too.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's also nice to point out though that you are also in a good location where I guess a lot of those things like the comedy clubs and stuff are maybe walking distance or at least pretty easy to get to, whether it be through a
hmm
BTS. So what about the regions? I mean, what area do you live and what areas do you tend to like when it comes to living or housing or things like that?
Yeah. I live in the downtown area of Bangkok, where a lot of foreigners and expats. It's sort of the Japanese kind of area, but also a lot of Westerners live where I live, which is in Prompong. So very close to sort of big BTS stations that do also allow you to go kind of different directions fairly quickly. Um, so yeah, I've been based in that area the whole time. Um, then again, I think there were sort of maybe personal reasons for my wife and I to be in that area, and had we had different situation, I think that there are a lot of other areas that are great to live in, and so I think I wouldn't say that's the only one. And I think over time, as over the past 10 years, more and more foreigners have gone into different neighborhoods as well. So if you have more foreign friends, then you can still kind of have that kind of network and live in different areas.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, I think it's a great area that you live in, though, and like you say, it's like you can kind of find the areas that you like, whether it's there's going to be bars nearby, there's going to be comedy clubs nearby, or you can certainly get a little bit more in the outskirts if you prefer a more silent area or whatever, right? So there's kind of a something for everyone. And luckily, since the BTS runs through a lot of good areas, you can pretty easily live a little bit on the outskirts and get into the city
Yeah.
as well. Now, one of the kind of closing questions I have for you, Pierre, is future plans. So you're, as you said, like the 10-year anniversary for being here. You've accomplished a lot since you've been here. What are your ideas and plans for the future?
Yeah. Well, I mean, with a baby, showing up in a month, I think being a dad and being a good dad is definitely going to be a big part of my focus, um, for sure. And then, professionally, I think our company is going through a lot of changes and kind of trying to continue going up market. And I think that's a very interesting opportunity. I mean, for the company, but also for myself to kind of push myself and sort of um, doing more interesting work and creating more partnerships, especially with different agencies that are located in the US or overseas. Continue to build our reseller program with IT companies that are based out of the US. And I think what we're seeing is that this is where we're really good at. And when we work with other local firms. And so building a reseller and partner program that, really enables those different companies to scale and kind of faster is going to be a big focus of mine. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there that I'm looking to kind of double down on.
Oh, fantastic. And last question, if there's someone, let's say that they're someone who's French and they come into Thailand and they say, I don't know, I need to talk to another French person about where I can get a good croissant, right? Or something like this. What is the best way to get in touch with you or to or contact you if it's either about yourself or maybe even on the company side of things professionally, like you mentioned, since Pronto works in marketing and helps a lot of SMBs in that area. What are the best ways to get in touch?
Yeah, sure thing. I'd say the best way is just go on LinkedIn, look up Pierre-Emmanuel Mol, and you'll easily find me. There's not a lot of Pierre-Emmanuels, and I don't have a very common last name for a French person, so that combination should show up. And yeah, just feel free to send me a message and kind of go from there.
Yeah, fantastic. I can't recommend that enough. I mean, I've seen some people reach out to me and probably you as well, Pierre, on LinkedIn, where it's just like, hey, I'm from this area too. It would be great to connect. And sometimes doing that ahead of time, sometimes before even moving to Thailand, or it's just a great way to get in touch with people ahead of time. So anyway, I really appreciate the time, Pierre. I think you've accomplished a huge amount here. And not only that, going through the next chapter as being a dad here in Thailand is going to be a fantastic thing for you. So, but thanks so much for taking the time, and we'll chat soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Scott. I really enjoyed our chat, and yeah, let's see each other soon.
Well, there you have it. Pierre emphasized the power of patience and persistence. His strong network and positive mindset has undoubtedly played a pivotal role in his success story here in Bangkok. I hope you learned something, and I'll catch you on the next one.